Hello, and welcome back to another episode of International Immersion, a podcast that seeks to capture the combined experiences of people, culture, places, traveling, current events, living abroad, and everything that comes along with them. For this episode, I want to revisit and delve deeper into the COVID-19 pandemic. It is pretty obvious to see that the entire world is being affected in one way, shape, or form. But living in the United States now and having lived with COVID for nearly 1 year, I think it's important to look at COVID from a larger perspective, looking at both historical, personal, and external factors from people I know and other realms of ideas as well. So to begin with, historically we are living through one of the most unique experiences human beings have dealt with in the past. Unfortunately, it is probably one of the most tumultuous, negative, and costly because history has shown us that the majority of people do not die in warfare or other types of civil strife, but in pandemics. So just to kind of review this, throughout human history, or at least recorded human history, we have dealt with a large number of plagues. Some of the most devastating, of course, were the Antonine Plague during the Roman Empire around 165 AD, which left nearly 5 million people dead, although we don't know the full numbers because of the sources. The next one on the list would be the Plague of Justinian during the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire between 541 and 542, which left between 30 and 50 million dead, and of which there were many reoccurrences in the following decades and few centuries. Continuing on from that, we have the well-known and infamous the Black Death in the 1350s during the Middle Ages, which the primary component of that was bubonic plague, which left as many as 200 million dead, or at least 1/3 of the human population in the Old World. Perhaps probably the most well-known as mentioned, and potentially the most devastating in the history of humanity. Moving along, you come to the Columbian Exchange, which it was initiated in 1492 with Columbus's voyage to the New World, which over the subsequent decades and centuries, you see the arrival of Europeans, but also the diseases of the Old World that were brought to the New World, and a mortality rate of as high as 90% in the New World among the population centers, primarily being the Aztec empires, the Inca, the Maya, and other Native American civilizations and tribes across both North, Central, and South America. Following that, we're getting into more contemporary times. We have the Spanish flu, which started in 1918 at the end of World War I, lasted several years, and left between 20 and 50 million people dead, which, as we know now, was a form of influenza. Perhaps the most devastating of the 20th century up until now. And then following that, the advent of, which everyone is aware of, HIV or AIDS in the late 1970s through the 80s, that continues to this day, which has left as many as 35 million people dead, although we have slowly but surely began to combat the virus, and it is no longer as virulent or as devastating to humans as it used to be, albeit still a plague and one that has to be contained and monitored. And then coming into closer times, we have the SARS in 2003, although while it only left 774 people dead and infected more than 8,000, it is related to the pandemic we are currently facing, which of course is coronavirus. Albeit they're not the same, but they're very similar viruses in their structure and in their genetic makeup, which leads to COVID-19, the current pandemic that we've been facing since the end of 2019. As of now, it's left nearly 1.8 million people dead, and the death toll in the United States as of today is approaching 400,000, which in my opinion is absolutely atrocious and just unacceptable in my opinion based on the type of technology and the abilities that we have now to combat infectious disease. Albeit it is new, it's something that we have not encountered before, but just that in and of itself says a lot. Although, on the other side of the coin, compared to many of the earlier plagues, the current death toll is a pale shadow of what happened in previous plagues, like with the Plague of Justinian, the Black Death, the Columbian Exchange, the Spanish flu, HIV or AIDS, and numerous other cases of infectious disease that have manifested throughout history. So in a way, we are living through a historical time right now, and something that manifests once or twice every century, give or take some periods of time where you had more cases of infectious disease. And in the cases of some of the larger pandemics, once that only happens in a few centuries, if not longer. So what can be said of this? What can people do, and what can be done to try to understand it and bring this into a more clear context for the global population at large now as to how to deal with this? I would have to say that that's a very complicated question and an even more complicated answer, of which that I don't think anyone can really generate or propose right now, because everyone, as mentioned, on a global scale is suffering from this, either directly or indirectly. But at the same time, this is a great opportunity for people to learn and adapt to a crisis and grow stronger from it. The reason why I'm stating this is the fact that this is one of the hallmark defining features of us as a species, is our adaptability and our ability to overcome and get through challenges, crises, so on and so forth. Humans have been able to get through a large number of catastrophes in the past. A stark example of this was the Toba eruption 75,000 years ago. Toba was a supervolcano located in the Indonesian archipelago, and around that time, when this eruption happened, the human population globally was reduced to between 10,000 and maybe as few as 3,000 individuals across the planet. Despite this, we got through it, and we are now numerous across the planet, with over 7 billion individuals currently living. So if we can get through something of this magnitude, we can get through almost anything. Plus, being at a time when human technological advancement was far, far inferior to what it is now. So tying this back into the COVID pandemic, in order for us to get through this, we have to understand the pandemic and we have to understand what it is. So I would say, to begin with, we have to understand what we're dealing with, and on an individual level, we need to educate ourselves about what is COVID-19, what are the effects, get through misinformation, and focus on scientifically proven facts that we know. Now, granted, we don't know everything about this virus right now. We don't know the full measure of what it's capable of, and that may take years or longer to fully understand because it is something new. But scientific principles are the best way to understand this, and people who follow them are going to come out ahead of those who do not. And I get it. This has caused a huge disruption in our lives and has created a lot of anxiety, frustration, and in many cases, I think, myself included, sometimes I lose patience with the restrictions. I lose patience with everything it prevents me from doing. But at the end of the day, I have to tell myself, what is more important? Me surviving this, me staying healthy, or letting go of some of my conveniences that I used to have? And luckily, I would say for myself personally, I've not had to sacrifice a lot to maintain safety and my own personal security. Although I have had to sacrifice things, and I think that in the long term, if we all need to come together and we need to try to get through this as quickly as possible. And I think that's what's proving to be very challenging, especially here in the United States, because, as we all know, people have a wide range of opinions, thoughts, and perspectives on COVID-19, which is fair and that's completely fine. But at the same time, there needs to be a more of a collectivist, more open and long-term thought about how to get through this and how to both protect you as a person, but those around you, which is something that we are struggling with and continue to struggle with. New vaccine is a great start, but with the virus mutating and new strains coming up, this is something we're going to continue to deal with for some time now. How long? History will tell and time will tell. But until there is more of a consensus approach and attack on this virus, we're going to continue to have to suffer, and we're going to continue to have to deal with the effects of life in a pandemic. And drawing back to what's previously been said, while our lives have been inconvenienced. It's nothing like what happened in the past when you would have entire population centers depopulated 50% or even more. And in the case of some of the plagues, literally everyone you knew or everyone that you would know would die, or perhaps you and a couple of family members would only survive out of your entire extended family. And another factor is, thank God this is not a more virulent virus like Ebola or other types of viruses that, thank God, are not as hardy as corona, but have proven to have a much higher mortality rate. Hence, I think perhaps the most important aspect that we have to have now is to remain positive and optimistic. And I know this is incredibly hard for so many people who have been so heavily affected by this pandemic, myself included, who've lost family members, and I know of people who've lost family members and friends due to this pandemic, which is absolutely horrifying, and it's sorrowing, and it just mentally and physically, psychologically is just devastating. But we have to be thankful for what we have, and we have to be thankful that this is not something that is worse, because, as they say, it can always be worse. And while it's sometimes very difficult to accept that, it is always the case. As mentioned, this could be a more virulent type of virus. It could be a more virulent pathogen, whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, we are now in a position in this day and age where we have the most advanced ability to deal with pathogens and a pandemic, something that our ancestors did not have. And even though the abilities around this planet of ours, different countries, different institutions, while their abilities to deal with this will vary, overall, we are in a better position, and that brings hope to me. And I do think that we are going to get through this. How long again? No one can say. But at the end of the day, this is a good fact and something that we should all take a lot of stock in and come out of this better, more informed, and have a stronger sense of care and compassion for our fellow person, because I think that's very much needed in this day and age, especially here in the United States when there's so much going on, both politically, socially, and of course, health-wise. I think that we need to take this opportunity to come together and to put aside differences for the greater good. And not just for the United States, but for the world. We're all humans. We all have the same capacities. We all have the same desires and wants, more or less. This pandemic does not discriminate between where you live, where you're from, what you believe in, or anything like that. So I just wanted to make this episode today to kind of give a little perspective and historical relevance to what we're facing, and at the same time demonstrate that while we're suffering and going through a rough time, something that potentially our children or even grandchildren won't deal with again, and potentially even great-grandchildren, pray to God they don't have to deal with it either, but something that we can take and learn from and come out better. This has been another episode of International Immersion. Please let us know what you think. And if you have any ideas, comments, or suggestions, feel free to contact us, and we'll gladly take those into consideration. And as mentioned, I think this episode today was something that I wanted to do to give a larger perspective about the situation we're facing and to express my thoughts and opinions about it. So please stay safe, everyone, and let's hope this pandemic will end soon so we can get back out and explore this great world of ours and continue to learn and adapt. And with that, we will see you on the next one.